So getting into a conversation this hour, it's one that has, gripped the headlines for about a week or so, but it's not a news story, and it's one that has been there for some time. And it's not just a story, but it's an issue. Joining us this morning for that conversation, Wangui Kaniaru, I'm going to say that correctly.
Yes, Kaniaru.
Kaniaru, good morning, is an advocate and an alumna of the Alliance Girls High School. She's joined this morning by Christine Mungai, who is a journalist, a friend, and an alumna of the Alliance Girls High School. Both of them here this morning. Ladies, karibu sana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Glad to have you here. Of course, even as we say your names and titles, everybody, of course, is just imagining what it is that we're going to speak about this morning. But before we do that, welcome to the hot seats of the Situation Room. Dennis is going to share a proverb from a country in Africa. We would like to hear your interpretation of that proverb. Both of you, and tell us what you think about it. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's all right.
Okay. The country we are in today is Nigeria. Nigeria, good music, good food, proper clothing.
You can think he's been there.
Movies, and we also have a good host, Nduoko. You know what I mean? And so let's just go straight to the proverb today. If the hyena betrays the bush, it has nowhere to hide. If the hyena betrays the bush, it has nowhere to hide. How would you interpret that?
That's a very interesting proverb, especially because Alliance Girls is colloquially known as Bush.
Yes.
That is the proverb for the day. So apt.
If the hyena betrays the bush, it has nowhere to hide. That's exactly right. When you betray the institution of Alliance Girls, you have nowhere to hide. Systemic dysfunction, a lack of accountability, a lack of controls, that ends now. It stops. Now I realize I'm sort of going straight, there's no warm-up, we're going straight into it. But if I also contextualize the proverb more broadly, it really speaks to loyalties, and it speaks to accountability, and it speaks to legacy. The hyena needs the bush. The bush provides shelter. The bush provides context. The bush provides security. Right? The hyena is accountable for the way it deals with that bush. If the hyena harms the bush, there are consequences attached to that. So I actually think it is a very sort of pithy analogy to where we are now. The question needs to become, who are the hyenas? Where is the harm landing in the context of this conduct? And why is it that hyenas feel they can still hide?
Christine.
Yeah.
I don't have much to add. I maybe will broaden it up a little bit more, that we all exist in context and in society. We are never just singular islands, depending on... There are no self-made people in society, right? We all depend on each other. And I think when we step out of that context and decontextualize ourselves in that way, there will be consequences. It may not be today or tomorrow, but I think we owe things to each other, and that's what this proverb is talking about. Yeah.
Amazing.
No, it's interesting. Our advocate here with that context of Alliance Girls, Bush, and then hyena, Fisi.
Bush.
And you know how we contextualize Fisi in our current situation.
Exactly.
Fits perfectly.
Yeah.
Indeed, it does. And like we said, no stretching, no warm-up. We're getting into it at this point. We'll start with you, Christine, because a couple of weeks ago, maybe not even 2 weeks ago now, then it came out into the open, the first part of this expose that you did, giving your personal experience of what happened with you while at school. There's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of things being said. And that's why you're here, both here this morning. And giving rise to what we are still, I guess, required under a lawful process to call allegations of what happened to many girls who attended the institution of Alliance Girls over time, but by one man. So let's hear from you, Christine. What happened and why did you decide to write this story?
Okay, so my personal experience only takes up at most 10% of the story.
Yes.
90% is other people's experiences and through different generations and cohorts of students. Starting from the early 2000s when I joined all the way to the 2020s where we are right now. So the story is basically a deep dive investigation that took me about 4 years to put together, that describes patterns of what I would call very concerning behavior that are consistent over time and are reported by multiple people. So in this, as part of the story, I spoke to more than 25 former students, several former teachers, a former chaplain, just to get a sense of, what the school climate was like, and particularly this one teacher and the space that he occupied in the school. He's a history and German teacher and also the CU patron. In a school like Alliance, the CU club is
The club.
It's a huge deal. Like, the Christian culture and background of the school is like extremely important to the institutional culture. It's a school that was started by missionaries and takes that Christian aspect extremely seriously, which means that the CU patron has not just a formal position, but also a lot of social power in the school.
Yep.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
What happened?
Yeah. I can talk about my own experience that is mirrored throughout these accounts that I gathered. A teacher who was very charismatic, very well-liked, I would say, generally speaking, at least even during our time. Friendly with the students, could have conversations outside academics. One of them described him as being a slice of home away from home.
Wow.
Which is really, important in a boarding school environment. Kids are homesick. And this is the kind of person who you could have that kind of relationship with.
Yes.
But either while in school or just after school, some emotional entanglement. The teacher getting close to the students in a way that raises some questions, and then that behavior crossing into physical or sexual relationships. And this pattern, like I said, consistent, over the time that I looked into, with multiple accounts describing the same thing, similar patterns.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can ask it openly and plainly, Christine. Did he get into what would be an abusive relationship with you, being a child at the time while you were at school? Did you experience that?
So while I was at school, I would say that we had a very good relationship. I wouldn't say that it crossed any boundaries. He was just a really friendly, amazing mentor, someone we all looked up to, and personally was an important person in my life that shaped my character and was the kind of, when you're asked to write the composition of like my best teacher kind of thing. Yeah, it would be him, and he embodied those qualities. But soon after high school, while I was 19 years old at the time, so I was just in my first year of campus. At the time, I was, just after high school, I started attending his church. So I was still in contact with him right after school, continuously, even after.
You say his church. The church that he attended?
The church that his father founded.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's the son of a pastor.
Okay.
And yeah. So myself and a few of my classmates were part of that church community as well, which means that after school, I would say that we were still in each other's lives. I would still see him at church every single Sunday. And because we were from Alliance, we were quickly given leadership positions in the youth ministry, which means that we were still kind of like having this prominent responsibilities. And when I was 19, I had an encounter with him that really destabilized me. It was a physical encounter that I did not solicit, that left me feeling like the world had crumbled around me, like a rug had been pulled under my feet, because it was very unexpected. It was not in context. There was nothing in our relationship that was leading us there. It felt exploitative. It was really hurtful. And I start with that in the story. But I would say that in the years after that, I did not feel like I had anywhere to go to report this or to do anything about it, mostly because of his image, the image that he had created, that everyone knew him to be this very upright, very righteous person who was on everyone's pedestal, right? And so, I took my time to move on, I would say, to heal, to move on, and life moved on. I grew up, became a
This
proper...
is after that encounter? That's when you decided to move on?
Yes. And then, I became an adult, became a journalist, life moved on. But later on, this is 12 years after that incident, when I started being more active with the alumni community at Alliance and like getting to know the younger alumni especially, I started hearing stories from them. And this is not one or two or three people. This is independently of each other, bringing up what seems like this whole pattern just intensified over time. And they reported much, much more troubling things than what I had seen or even what I had experienced.
Did these come up in conversation, or did you request for information?
In conversation. I never... In all honesty, I never solicited these stories at all. I was in spaces as an alumni, I was introduced to younger ex-Busharians. I was asked to mentor them. Some of them were, journalists studying communication, and that's how I got introduced to them. This is someone who looks up to you as a journalist. Maybe you can, support them, encourage them, etc. It was really casual relationships that the baseline was just our shared background as alumni of Alliance Girls. But they would bring up this teacher, and I was really surprised. Like, we were not even talking about him or about anything specifically about the school, but this kept coming up. I remember in 2018, there was one alumni who put up a post about a teacher who had molested her while she was in school at Alliance, and she named this teacher's, the subject that this teacher was teaching, an English teacher. And in the comments, people started everyone was really shocked, but also they started hinting that this is what happened is not an isolated thing, that there is a teacher who someone should look into. Wow. Several comments said that, and I recognized some of those names, and some of them were not even known to me. So I actually DM'd one of the commenters. This is a girl who was many years after me in school, so I didn't even know her personally. And I said, there's something about what you've said. Do you feel comfortable to tell me who this teacher is? Because remember, at this point, I had rumors from others, right? Or rather, their stories from other people. And she DM'd me immediately and she named him. This is what I'm saying. Like, this story kept coming to me from different quarters, repeatedly over many years. And eventually, when I watched what alumni were trying to do to address the culture of what came across as institutional failures at the school, I saw how those initiatives failed, and I outline it in the story. One of them tried to start what she called a Big Sisters Club, where alumni would, her idea was that alumni would come and talk to the girls about healthy relationships, about boundaries, how do you know you're being groomed, how is a teacher supposed to act towards you, what's a red flag, kind of thing. But how that initiative was just quietly suppressed at the school, and how disappointed she felt that she wasn't able to do much. And then in 2021, it even became kind of a bigger failure, because there were two credible accounts of young students who had just finished at Alliance. They were between the ages of 18 and 20. And they were in sexual relationships with this teacher.
Full-blown sexual
Yes,
relationships.
after being like very kind of, what can I say? After being in spaces with him all through their schooling life. You know, they were captains, they were leaders of the clubs that he was patron in, and then these stories were reported to this church community that I'm talking about, but really there was no serious accountability that happened. So what I'm saying is that in that community, this was a story that was, you know, followed the institutional channels. Report this to the pastor. The church structure will do this and this. But that's not what happened. And so I'm here witnessing, not only hearing multiple accounts of the same pattern of behavior, but also witnessing 2 failed attempts at accountability. And in the end, that's when I made the decision to pursue this as a formal journalistic investigation. And all these people who had told me these stories, I interviewed them afresh, now formally, properly, to be part of the story. Yeah,
we'll come to that a little bit more. I want to hear from Wangui. Did you hear, were you affected by this in any way?
During my academic career or beyond?
Or beyond?
Well, I think the question of did I hear and was I affected? I heard about this story in terms of the extent and breadth of it through the expose. And then I had the story behind the expose, which was that the school had been notified. The principal and the board of management had been notified about 3 months before the story broke, and had asked for some time to look into the situation. And had been given a right of reply regarding the facts or the disclosures in the article, and had said nothing by the time the article was being published.
3 months didn't respond?
Correct.
Okay.
And so the question for me began to, the thing that I zoomed in on was, why the silence? What is happening? We are becoming aware of this as outsiders to the institution when the story breaks and it is live. You apparently had been informed about this story at least 3 months before it broke. And so the question for me became a twofold question. Were you aware of what had been going on in this institution over this period of time? Now, there are 2 possible answers to that question. Yes, you were aware. And so the question then becomes, if you were aware, what did you do about it? And why did the interventions that were made fail to stop this? If the answer is no, why were you not aware? Why were there no systems for reporting? Why was there no accountability for investigating? And why was there no boundary imposed for protection of students? So that's what I was trying to wrap my mind around. Because the institution that I went to school in was an institution where, if I felt unsafe to the extent that had been disclosed in this article, I would have been able to speak to somebody. I would have been able to speak to my class teacher. I would have been able to speak to my house mistress. I would have spoken to my parents. And something would have changed. So the idea that there's an institutional silence, and the idea that it seems there's an accountability failure, was something I was trying to wrap my mind around. And so, just picking up on some of the things that Christine has described as her experience, and the experiences that are described in the stories that she ended up hearing over time, I think the thing that I find particularly striking is, first of all, having joined his church and continued in a youth leadership position under his authority, she was still in an authority relationship with this teacher at the time when he initiated sexual contact with her. And under the Sexual Offences Act, there is an offence of abuse of authority. And that offence of abuse of authority actually puts teachers in a special category of adult. Teachers specifically are given a higher duty because they have a special responsibility because of the position of authority and control they hold over students. There is no statute of limitation on crimes under the Sexual Offences Act.
Okay. Statute of limitations, just for, we're saying that there's no time.
There is no time limit.
Yeah.
There is no time
Limit.
limit.
Yeah.
The accountability that would happen in such a situation is still current. One other thing, just to be clear, is the idea of vulnerability. Because I think, Christine, you were at Alliance from 2000 to 2003, right?
Yes.
And over the passage of time, you mention an intensified pattern over time in the context of the disclosures that people were making to you.
Yes.
And I was really trying to understand that. I was trying to understand what is it that seems to be making these girls become increasingly vulnerable over time. In the absence of systems, in the absence of accountability, in the absence of boundaries that are being set by people in authority over them at the school. And what I then understood was, through the stories that were coming out, that the culture of the institution has changed. It is actually unrecognizable to people who went to Alliance, right?
Can I jump in and just say one of the things that increases the vulnerability and that made me very concerned with the younger alumni is the teacher is getting older every year, but the girls remain the same age. So the relative age gap between, let's say, myself, my generation, and him was just over a decade. But by the time we're talking to alumni of 2019, he's 25, 27, almost 30 years older than these girls, right? And that, just the simple passage of time makes these girls more and more vulnerable. And the pattern that I outline in the story just describes how it seems that over time they became less and less empowered, but more and more harm was happening.
Christine, at the time you were 18 years old.
Yeah.
He was at least 15 years older than you?
12.
12 years older than you at the time. That was 25 years ago. That was, yes, it was 23 years ago. 2003 is when you left school?
Yes, I left school in 2003.
And you were 18 at the time.
I was 17.
You were 17 at the time.
17.
That was 22 years ago. And if he was 30 at the time...
He wasn't 30. He was...
29. He's 12 years older than you. At 17, he was 29.
Yes, 29.
So 22 years from now, he's 51 today.
He's 50 right now.
So we're talking about girls who, like you said, who's still 17 years old.
Yes.
17, 16, now dealing with somebody who's 22 years older, who's doing the same thing that he was doing 22 years ago.
And I think the important thing about that, Christine, as you respond, in the context of vulnerability, is to understand what's become different over time with regard to the girls' experience of their academic careers. The number of contact hours the girls are spending in proximity to and under the oversight of their teachers has significantly increased. Contact hours are the number of hours spent in a learning context with a teacher.
Okay.
What does this mean? And I want you to understand these are girls who are 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. Okay. This is a day in the life of a student at Alliance Girls. And then I want to tell you about a week in the life of a student at Alliance Girls. And I want you to consider that this student spends 9 months of the year within the institution. A day in the life, 6 to 8 o'clock in the morning, morning prep. 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning, morning prep. And then there's parade or class meeting. 9 to 12 class, that's 3 hours. Lunch, 2 to 4 class, that's another 3 hours. 4 to 6 homework, assignments, etc. 7 p.m., 6 to 7 dinner. 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. evening classes. Those are 11 hours in the student's day that are spent in direct contact or under the direct supervision of a teacher. 11 hours a day for 5 days a week, that's 55 hours. On Saturdays, they have prep from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. That's 6 hours. That's so
61.
61. On Sundays, they have prep from 7 to 10:30. That's another 3 hours. So we're talking about 65 hours of contact hours, direct contact hours with a teacher or a supervising authority for these girls. To contextualize, under the Employment Act in Kenya, the standard work week for adults in employment is 40 hours. The vulnerability of students in such a context is staggering. The other thing that's changed is the definition of what it means to be an alliance girl. So I met someone at a forum who'd graduated in 2019. And afterwards, we realized we actually went to the same school. And I asked her, you know what does it mean to you when you say I went to Alliance? What did it mean to you as a student? And she said, when she was about 16 years old, it meant 3 things. 1, that she was at the Alliance Girls. 2, if she had made it there as a student, she was expected to be smart and to be able to handle hard things, handle challenges. And 3, if you are an Alliance girl, you must protect the school's name and reputation, and you must never bring shame to the institution. Now, I want to go back a step to that second point, which is if you made it here, you're expected to be smart and to handle challenges. What was interesting to me in the subsequent accounts that have been coming out following this expose by students, former students of Alliance Girls, people who are survivors and victims, is in the context of an escalating culture of punishment. Whenever a student was being punished, and punishment includes verbal abuse, humiliation, bullying, physical, corporal punishment, when any of those things were happening to a student, the first question they're asked is, what was your grade in KCPE? I am unclear how that question has any relevance to a discipline process. But zooming in on that, and this idea that if you're smart, you're able to handle hard things. So what's your grade? If you're not being able to handle hard things, the implication is you're not smart. And if you're not smart, then you don't deserve to be at the Alliance Girls, because the Alliance Girls is for the best and brightest students. So 65 hours a week of contact time with your teachers in a context where you have the potential to be subjected to verbal abuse, public humiliation, intimidation by being asked continuously, are you smart enough to be here? Are you smart enough to handle it? And if you're not handling, you're not smart. That is not the alliance we went to. That is not the alliance we went to. And when the outrage arose and students came back to the school asking questions, what I realized, what made this personal for me, is that when I say I went to Alliance and I'm asked what Alliance meant to me, it means something completely different to these students.
From what you're hearing now.
And they are then having to try and tell a story and try and call out a truth that has been rendered invisible because of a lack of systems, a lack of accountability, a lack of oversight.
Kristen, Mike, well, I have several questions, but let me just go in this particular order. This teacher and all these girls that you've been talking to, because you said you are in groups or you are engaging younger alumni, how far back, in terms of tracing these stories, do you go? How far back? Are we talking about 20 years?
So the accounts that I was able to corroborate that I included in the story begin in 2006, 2007. The ones that I was not able to corroborate, like to get first-hand accounts, go back further than that.
And so, Wangui has given us a glimpse into, in terms of context, the hours that students are interacting with the teachers. And we all went to high schools, and it's exactly the same, I think, in most of the high schools, from prep time. But right before prep time, because this teacher was also CU patron.
yeah.
There is what we used to call morning glory prayers.
Yeah.
And sometimes you also have the same prayers in the evening. I'm curious to understand the spaces of vulnerability, because once you are in a class session, it's very difficult for a teacher, maybe they would, to make certain advances. In what spaces was this teacher choosing to then target the girls? Because there is what was happening in school, there is then what was happening in his father's church. So you move from school, you're out of school, you join and connect with the youth ministry in church, and the cycle continues. So what spaces was he picking? Because when you look at the character of predators, they're not stupid people, they're smart, and they will know which and what times and places to then make their wicked moves. In your experience, and from the girls that you're talking to, what exactly was happening? How was he selecting these places?
So I'm just going to zoom in on the CU and on the drama club and describe what those two spaces were like. Starting with morning devotion, like you said, when I was a student, there was no morning devotion until I was in fourth form. And it's this teacher, Peter Hiro, who started morning devotion at Alliance.
And he was the one who would preach in that morning devotion?
Yes, he would pray and he would lead the morning devotion from 6 to 6:30. That was in our time.
That was every day?
That was every weekday. Before then, there was no morning devotion.
Okay.
And then with CU, we had CU on Saturday and Sunday. So Saturday CU was more like Saturday evening. It was more of like an internal CU led by the students themselves, a bit more intimate. We never used to have like external guests or external preachers during that CU, and it was about 2.5 hours on Saturday evening.
Call it weekend challenge.
Yeah, and then the Sunday CU was on Sunday afternoon from 4:30 from Sunday afternoon. And that one used to be a bit more dynamic, a bit more vibrant. You know, external groups would come, the usual ministries that K Crew, Sitam, the rest. We would invite different churches and different youth ministers to come. And essentially that was, I would say, this is what I say about like CU specifically. And to some extent the drama club as well. Those are spaces that are very formative to young people and teenagers specifically. It's not like Sunday school when you are a young kid. Sunday school is just about stories and coloring and games. But as an adolescent, you're actually self-introspecting a lot and developing your identity. And CU is a space where there's a lot of that like shaping of who you are and who you're going to be. It's what I call a liminal space in the sense of like things are malleable there, because of the nature of the interaction there. It's a spiritual thing. You're also spiritually and emotionally open. You're vulnerable. Drama is another space that encourages children and adolescents specifically to take risks, to step into new spaces, to take on characters and to do hard things, like you're saying, to get over fear of public speaking, of being in the limelight, of taking a role. So it's also, drama is a space that is also kind of makes adolescents malleable in some sense, because you're already like open to experiences and to kind of stepping into fear and overcoming challenges. So I think those two arenas specifically, because of their inherent kind of vulnerability, there are spaces that are associated with personal growth, with shaping identity.
And he was there.
He was the patron. He was the patron.
To give you
correct.
Guidance.
Correct.
Okay. And we look at these happenings over time. And we had a bit of a troubling conversation the other day around this issue as well. And one of the things that came out in a different context, of course, but still kind of relevant to this, is that these things happened today. They are traumatic, even if they happened 10 years ago, even if they happened 50 years ago, at a time where a girl is impressionable and vulnerable. It happened. It has an effect. Christine, it happened to you 22 years ago. 22 years ago, not to the extent that it may have happened with others, but you still remember it today. It has affected you to date. So the question comes that, why did it take so long for it to come out in such a public manner that it did? And I know I'm going to come to Dennis in just a bit. Sorry.
Okay. So the question of why now? Why is this coming out now? First of all, there's the aspect of it's not coming out now. It came out earlier in several other contexts, but the institutions that were supposed to address this did not. So that's number one. But secondly, that question, why now? It's, the truth is sometimes time is needed. Time is needed for the confusion to clear, for trust to be rebuilt elsewhere. For example, in my relationships with these younger alumni, sometimes time is needed for someone to just come and ask the right question. And I think that's what happened here. Sometimes it's just that they needed time to realize that they were not alone.
Okay.
Yeah. And they needed time to figure out where their story stands when someone else speaks. I keep saying that this is a pattern. It's not really about my experience specifically, but I'm just part of a much bigger story here. And to be honest, there's no perfect time to name a violation. The time comes when silence becomes a burden that's too heavy to carry. And I think that's what happened here.
So here's a question of things that I've picked up so far. A slice of home away from home, that represents trust that students had to this specific teacher. Then there is the institution that is mandated the responsibility of taking care of these of the students in the school. And at that point, when this was reported, the institution did not act. You look at her description of Bush during her time and the youngins right now, it's completely, totally different. Ask the question of systemic failure. And has Bush let down the students who have trusted the institution to take care of them?
Okay.
That's a very interesting question, and I'm glad you've asked it, because there are layers. We're peeling an onion, and there are a number of layers. So one is the idea that schools need to have systems. And one of those systems is a disciplinary framework. And the purpose of a disciplinary framework is to enable a conducive learning environment. Now, there's been, coming back to the three formational ideas that students at Alliance Girls have in the recent past as what it means to be at Alliance. If you made it here, you're expected to be smart and to deal with hard things. And then because you are here, you must protect the school's name and reputation. Now, one of the hard things that students are then dealing with is this idea of discipline. There's an unholy trinity of facts that define the contextual experience of students that then lend themselves to abuses of institutional power. And this is the unholy trinity. Alliance is a brand. You want to be able to come there and say, I went to Alliance. That brand is pegged on excellence. Excellence is defined by academic performance. Academic performance is defined by discipline. Therefore, you will have a disciplinary structure that has increasingly intensive command and control elements, because people who are disciplined are people who perform. So, you have this brand, you have this reputation for excellence. That reputation is defined by a grade. That grade is promoted by discipline. So the question becomes, what is the disciplinary structure in the school? And, several students have mentioned a disciplinary structure that is problematic. It is problematic because there are no systems of accountability, apparently, for teacher conduct. So there's significant accountability imposed on students for their conduct, but very little for teachers. What does that mean? Practical example, excessive use of force in the context of discipline, verbal humiliation, psychological bullying in the context of discipline, intimidation in the context.
This is coming from teachers?
This is coming from teachers.
Even the bullying?
Yes, that's what students are saying. And students then say, and these are former students, they then say, verbal abuse is normal. I'm accustomed to being verbally abused. If I don't understand a concept, I'm accustomed to being told I'm stupid. And this for someone who's told, if you made it here, you're expected to be smart. So this feedback loop in the context of that kind of discipline is really a silencing mechanism. I'm not smart enough. I don't have a right to speak up, right? Brand, academics, discipline. It's very easy to use these elements to execute a strategy in the context of a lack of institutional accountability. That's, it's an acronym, DARVO, D-A-R-V-O. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. So deny, this is the alliance. What do you mean? Such things would never happen. And of course, when you say that, alumni agree. Those things never happened in my time. So if I say hand on heart, it would never happen that a teacher could come and say they're a slice of home away from home and, make you feel uncomfortable and there's no one to talk to. That would never happen in my time. Except now, the person who I'm supposed to talk to, who's my class teacher, is as likely as not to physically punish me, verbally abuse me, psychologically intimidate me in routine matters. How much more so if I am expressing a concern about another teacher's conduct?
Okay, so ladies, what we're saying here essentially is that there is no reporting, from what we are seeing now, there's no reporting mechanism where something as dangerous as this is happening for girls between the age, because I've seen them, they're young, 12 and 19 at school, can go and report and say, this is happening to me, with the expectation that something will be done about it. Just received a text from somebody this morning. She tells me, I was a board member at Alliance, and I'm reading this quote. She said, for 5 years, none of these teachers brought the matters to the board. None, ever. Board members need to be parents in school to bridge the gap between admin and girls. So never was this heard at a supervisory level from anybody, ever. So what you're saying is that there is no mechanism where these girls, these students, can report to a teacher with the expectation that this will be carried forward and something done about it?
That is what seems to be the case. And that's why we're asking what's happening with the systems, right? Now, so that's denial. Let's talk about attack and reverse victim and offender. These girls are supposed to be smart. They're supposed to be able to deal with hard things. And so there's a shaming that comes when you're a person who's seemingly not being able to deal with hard things, right? And there's not a confidential process for talking about challenges, struggles, issues. There's a guidance and counseling function, but it is not clear why students feel unsafe when they go to report guidance and counseling issues. And part of the answer to that question is those reports are not necessarily confidential. And part of the problem of that situation as well is the people who are supposed to be accountable for having a system of redress seem not to be redressing the actual issue. Right?
Okay.
And so there's unaccountability for authority figures, but maximum accountability for students. In that kind of a conversation space, there is no safe mechanism for self-disclosure. There is no safe space for accountability. When parents raise concerns, we're reversing the victim and offender. This institution is an institution that's focused on excellence. Excellence is academic performance. Academic performance comes through discipline. You're asking for too much to say, or you're making too much of a mountain out of a molehill when you say students are being verbally abused and intimidated. If they were smart, they'd be able to deal with challenges.
Oh, there we go. Because you're smart, you should deal with challenges, and that was the MO that you should carry in your mind.
Correct.
Okay.
And because, so if you're raising issues arising out of disciplinary contexts, that means you're indisciplined, right? That's the implication. You're an indisciplined person because the disciplined people are performing well academically. Okay. So it's a completely toxic mix. And that is why, from an accountability perspective, for us outside the school, we were saying, if there's a disciplinary framework which is intended to produce a safe learning and conducive learning environment, what are the systems? What are the standards? What ways can students raise issues or concerns about conduct of teachers? And when those issues and concerns are raised, who is notified about those issues, whether at a parental level or at a board level? How are those issues investigated and resolved? And is there a clear way for students to do this without victimization? Is there a clear way for parents to do this without fearing their learners will be victimized? And if the answer to that question is no, why not?
So, Christine,
Yep.
because Wangui is talking about accountability.
Yep.
And it's easy because of how the story then has unfolded. It's easy then to say we were not aware, we were not told, we didn't know. And so from the conversations you've had with these girls, who do they report to about these violations? Did they speak to another teacher? Did they raise this with the school principal? Who do they raise these issues with? Or they just kept it to themselves?
Well, let me talk about the first-hand accounts that I gathered. Most of them kept it to themselves or shared it with their friends. One of the girls in the account, so I just want to talk about the kind of incidences that I outlined. There were 6 first-hand accounts that I outlined. 4 of them are talking, outline physical or sexual relationships that are initiated soon after school by this teacher. But 2 of them actually are physical violations that happened while they were still students. One of them reports the teacher kissing her while she was still a student, and the other one reports groping, like underclothes. Yeah, and one of these girls said that I didn't feel like I could tell anyone about this. And she says specifically, there was no female teacher who felt safe enough. They all either hated him or feared him. And I felt like this would blow back on me and I would be the one in trouble. And this is something that the girls say consistently, where that's number one. It's that they never felt like they had any kind of recourse, right? Because a lot of times, institutions are not just built on procedures and what is laid down. It's also about trust and how safe people feel, right? That's number one. Number 2 is that this is a teacher who had a very high public profile in the school as the most righteous, most upright, most, other teachers are, question mark. But me, this one, never. You get? So this is the person who had the image of being above reproach. You understand how psychologically damaging it is for that very same teacher who 1 week ago at CU was talking about sexual purity, how flee immorality, telling you the Bible verses of all these things. That's the same person who is doing this. You understand how it creates so much cognitive dissonance that it's almost impossible to bridge that. Then the last thing is that these are adolescents, right? Adolescents are children, but getting into adulthood into themselves, right? But teenage girls in particular, the way we raise teenagers and girls in particular is a lot of times we silence them and we discredit what they're saying and make them the problem. Culturally and societally, it's like, you are the one who brought this upon yourself, right? And this is the messaging that they get. One of the girls that I quote in the story said that there was always this messaging that teenage girls are not that innocent and that
they're inviting
this and they're treated as like they're already guilty of something. If this happens to you, the question is not, why is this man doing this to me? The question is, what did I do to make him see me this way? And you see how that's already like girls are socialized to preemptively take the blame. And I think ultimately this is what happened here. And it's only when they got older and stepped more into their voice and also were able to realize that theirs was not an isolated incident. It's very interesting that all these girls I'm speaking to believed that it was just an isolated incident.
But it was just them.
Yes. I mean, like for some of them, they had quote unquote the rumors, but nothing had really been substantiated. But by the time they are in this encounter with this teacher, for many of them, for years and years believed that it was an isolated incident. It was just only them. And even for them, as they read the story, is when they came to realize that, hey, this was a pattern.
So was there a feeling that Mr. Airo at the time was being protected by the institution?
Not only a feeling, he would also say it explicitly. In the story, I outline how he would say, the reason why I have this much freedom in this school is because the principal trusts me.
He even had a house in school. He was living in school?
Yes, which is fairly routine for teachers.
Yes.
I mean, they
Yeah.
have teachers' quarters. Yes, he was living in school and had a house there.
But were there incidents when he would invite students to his house?
So I haven't gathered personally. I haven't gathered any accounts of him taking students to his house in school while they were students. But after KCSE, after they graduated, while he was still an authority figure and in contact with them, yes, this is after school.
And I think just picking up on that and then shifting into the point that Christine has made, which is really important about trust. You see, the school has systems and it has processes. When students come back to school for events that are intended to have them formally interact with former students, there's a process for their accommodation. The school has a guest house. The process and the practice ought to be that if a patron of a club or a society says that he's invited former students to the school, he or she has invited former students to the school for an event that might require them to stay overnight, he asks the deputy principal in charge of administration and discipline for the availability of the facility, and then arrangements are made for their food, for their accommodation, for everything. There is no reason in policy or in fact for former students to be coming back to the school and staying overnight in a teacher's house, particularly a male teacher's house. And this happened more than once, as per the accounts in the article. So
Very, very, very normalized.
it was completely normalized.
Yeah.
So again, when this idea that he was explicitly saying, I am invulnerable, and then by his actions showing that standard policies and procedures that should apply as a matter of conduct are not applying to him, it seems inconceivable to me. Or if it is the case, then there is in fact a case to answer for a lack of...
Because, just following on your train of thought, because I remember where I went to school, you have the teacher's quarters.
Correct.
So this teacher is not in isolation.
Correct.
His house is not in isolation.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's just right next to another teacher's house.
Yes.
Yeah.
When these girls, whom the teachers taught now when they leave school,
Yes.
when these girls start coming back and they're staying with him or visit him in his house, the other teachers obviously will notice from the gate, from
absolutely.
the security.
I talked to several teachers and all of them confirm what you're saying.
That they knew this was
Yes.
going
They knew
on.
this was going
Yes,
on.
they saw it happening. They saw girls coming in and out of his house. I mean, this was happening with the apparent sanction of the school. Imagine a situation where, like, tomorrow is Form 4 mentorship day, and Mr. Airo has taken charge of the event, and and everyone knows, like, he's going to invite old girls to come. You understand? And the whole day's program is packed, and the girls sleep at his house, and they do it on Saturday and on Sunday, and then they leave. Like, this was just openly sanctioned. Yeah, it wasn't. This is why in part 2, I take a lot of paragraphs to explain that this was happening with the apparent sanction of the administration. The girls were not sneaking around when they were coming to his house.
Because I can
They
imagine
were
that for
coming
other
as a group.
Because, Christine, for other things, I mean, we're talking about discipline so strict that you couldn't be caught walking in a certain part of the school at a certain time of day. Walking.
Yeah.
You had to be in a particular area.
Yeah.
So you would imagine that for you to be walking in and out of a teacher's house,
Yeah.
then that was within the knowledge and
there's an
sanction
explicit
of someone else.
There's an explicit rule in what passes for the rules of the institution at this stage, because when we asked, is there a disciplinary handbook? Are there clear guidelines of expectations of conduct between learners and teachers? Are there clear guidelines for conduct of patrons of clubs? Is there a clear way that a student can know what is appropriate or not appropriate in the context of a patron's actions? And if a patron does something that is inappropriate, is there a mechanism and a process by which a student can raise this issue? And if the issue is raised and it is investigated, is there a mechanism by which a patron can be removed or sanctioned for failure to comply?
Sure.
No answers to any of those questions. But what passes as the rules of the school explicitly says that students are forbidden from accessing staff quarters.
Okay.
But it doesn't say anything about
Staff accessing
Staff
students.
accessing students.
Yeah.
Obviously, the situation grows longer this morning because we're looking into this issue. So we're probably going to go another 10 or 15 minutes or so just to be able to flesh this out a little bit. Because then we get to the place where there was a court order. So the particular story or this being coming out into the public then was... Who sought that court order?
So Peter Iro sought that court order against me.
Why?
John Alanamu and Africa Uncensored. So we approached him for comment, his right of reply. As you know, responsible journalism, when you are mentioning someone adversely, you give them a chance to comment and, enough information to understand what the allegations and the story is going to be about. So John Allen called him on the 2nd of May. That was a Friday. And on the 5th of May, which was a Monday, is when he had filed the court papers to block the story from being published. And we received the court injunction the next day on the 6th of May, which blocked us from publishing the story until we had an inter-parties hearing. And the hearing was scheduled for the end of May, which means we were gagged for those 3 weeks.
Yeah.
At the inter-parties hearing, the magistrate asked both sides to, send the affidavits and all the evidence that would constitute each person's side. And she said that she would make a ruling on whether the injunction should remain or be lifted. She would make a ruling on the 4th of July. At this point, his lawyers asked that the injunction remain until the 4th of July, and the magistrate agreed, which means that this story was gagged from the beginning of May until the 4th of July, when the magistrate ruled in our favor. In her ruling, she mentioned that the mere existence of multiple corroborating accounts means that the story is in the public interest. And specifically, she talked about Article 53 of the Constitution, the best interest of the child. She said it's in the best interest of the child to live in a safe and healthy environment, and that this story is important to go out because it raises serious concerns of public interest, and specifically because this teacher is in a position of authority over minors. And that was her justification for lifting the injunction. And that's how we were able to publish the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's look at it from a legal point of view as well. We're looking at it from a former student's point of view, but here we are seeing certain things happening that the PS in the Ministry of Education, Bonabitok, has said he should be interdicted, should be arrested, that we should not be having any other kind of conversation apart from this at this point. That is what ought to happen. So there's that, but then there's also this which has come out repetitively, that the teachers at the school were aware of what was happening, but they, for whatever reason, I mean, we're getting these messages every day of the reasons as to why they would not mention this in a public manner or why they would not take it up. And also the decision that the school made to retain him, even in light of all these things that were happening. So those three things. And then the final one then would be, for this particular teacher now, with all that has come out, where is he and what would need to be done?
These are all really important questions. Now, first of all, I think it's important to contextualize a couple of things and pick up what Christine had said as well. What is the purpose of the story? The purpose of the story was to highlight patterns and apparent systemic failures and invite questions and scrutiny, because attempts at resolution internally had failed. Systems and processes that were supposed to safeguard, provide oversight, provide accountability had not worked. Now, there's a difference between an interdiction of a teacher and a prosecution of a criminal process and an ultimate reckoning. The TSC has been made aware of the situation. The TSC had been conducting an investigation. The acting CEO of the TSC indicated he had been interdicted. And so there's an employment process that is being followed. There's been an investigation. There will be a hearing. As part of that hearing, there will be reliance on testimony from people who have information that will assist with the investigation. And so part of what has been happening and part of what we're encouraging to happen is that people with knowledge of the situation that can provide context, that can provide insight, that can provide corroboration, whether for the students, whether for the institution, whether for him, should come forward. And this is actually a time to call out former administrators, teachers, people who are in positions of authority, who saw, who knew, who understood, to stand with Alliance. Girls say they went to Alliance. It's time for teachers, people in authority, people who were the adults in the room when these things were happening, to stand up and say, I stand with Alliance. And it's important to understand that standing with Alliance means protecting the girls. To protect the girls is to protect the institution, because the girls are the institution. And as soon as you see a contradiction between those two facts, you are looking to evade accountability. So that's one thing. The TSC investigation and process will run its course. There will then be a determination of what applicable penalty would apply, everything from mere suspension to dismissal. If it is anything less than a dismissal, there will be a case to answer for whether a process has been followed that promotes accountability. On the criminal side, right, a couple of myths to debunk. So one is there is no statute of limitation on a criminal offense. The nature of the offense and the nature of the sanctions of the offense are significant in that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether he's 99 years old when he is charged. There will be a recording. Second, whilst the standard for criminal conviction is beyond reasonable doubt, the nature of the elements of the offense vary and require people to come forward in order for an investigation to be undertaken. There are active steps going on right now for legal counsel to be retained to enable survivors and victims to come forward and be represented, even as they provide information that can create the grounds for charging criminal offences. And those criminal offences include, under the Children's Act, the offence of grooming. Now, there's been, I think, some public disinformation that suggests that grooming is just this, elitist word that is being used by people who went to Alliance to describe, bad behavior by students who did bad things and are now coming without shame and being uncouth and talking about things. That is not the case. So grooming is in fact an offence under the Children's Act. It is soliciting sexual contact with a child or a minor using electronic means. And we do have former students who've come forward and said that they were acts of solicitation from teachers using electronic means, using phones and other things. We encourage people who had those kinds of experience to speak up, because those are criminal offences. And people wonder, what's the big deal that your teacher, would allow you to use his phone? Your teacher would from time to time be a source of home away from home and, a source of safety. The problem with that is when teachers then turn around and say those are investments. Those are not things that are being done for free.
So, Akili,
sorry, and just to, if I may, so there's no statute of limitation on offences. Sexual offences, under the Sexual Offences Act, abuse of authority is an offence. It can be established that abuse of authority happens by teachers because they're in a special position regarding children who are particularly vulnerable. And so those processes will follow as complainants come forward and as charges are made, then there will be an arrest. And when arrest happens, then there will be a process through which prosecution will occur. So those are the two sort of steps. Yeah. And on accountability and so on, the key things are systems. Reporting systems that are confidential, that are secure, investigative processes that actually believe students when they raise issues and do not turn them into offences by denying and then attacking and reversing the victim and the offender. There need to be clear procedures that enable all stakeholders to come forward. And it's important to note in the context of intimidation, if even teachers felt intimidated, how much more so students? And that intimidation needs to be unpacked, it needs to be explained, because that then goes back to oversight and clear boundaries.
One of the girls that I interviewed said this, how would the teachers expect a student to take a risk that they themselves were not willing to take?
Exactly.
And Wakili, on the same, the teachers who were aware of this and chose to stay silent, people are saying they are equally accomplices to an offense that happens in school. What's your position on that? As well as just, do you feel like you're let down by the institution as former students?
I'll assume that the last question is rhetorical, but I'll come back to you. The issue of secondary liability and culpability is precisely why we're saying, not just in the alliance context, but nationally, there needs to be an urgent and critical conversation about safeguarding mechanisms, about accountability and reporting structures, and about a multi-agency approach to protection of students in educational institutions. Right now, if a person wants to be believed and wants to be protected, they'll need to go to the TSC to initiate a process as an employer. They'll need to go to the police to report an offence as a crime. They may need to go to the Child Welfare Services to report an issue because they're minors. All of these steps are opaque, they're confusing, they take a really long time. And in that context, the process or the acts of intimidation against students who are indisciplined because they allowed these things to happen to them, intimidation against teachers who are bringing the institution into disrepute, intimidation by administrators and by boards against people who report because, they're making institutions look bad. All these things make it very, very difficult for children to be protected in schools where they're the most vulnerable. So there needs to be a system change. And ultimately, from an oversight and a safety perspective, there need to be clear guidelines. It is not enough for the balance of power to always be on the side of the teacher, where a student has to prove that the teacher did something that made them feel unsafe, and the person who determines whether that thing amounts to a lack of safety for the student is the teacher.
It's the teacher. There's a lot going on, and our time is short. We're going to do one last question to you, Christine, and that is we see that with the accompanying documentation of this expose of these stories is that you're asking for more who have stories or experiences. I'm not going to call them stories, they're experiences to come forward. Does that mean that there will be more stories in the public about this, even while whatever processes for responsibility and accountability are taking place?
Yeah. Like I said, this is part of an ongoing investigation. By that I mean that the work doesn't just end when we hit publish, and then it went viral, and then now we can say, great story, it's done. The full extent of these patterns of abuse is still not known, not only at Alliance, but in so many other schools around the country, which is why we are still gathering accounts, and a lot of people have written, emails of their experiences, very heartbreaking stories, and like Wangui said, the TSC investigation is ongoing, and these accounts are all important in building a picture to truly understand the extent of what happened, not just at Alliance, but what continues to happen in so many educational institutions around the country. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being here in the room this morning. And I know you have one last thing. Wangui.
Yes. I think Dennis asked the question, am I disappointed in the institution? And I want to say unequivocally, yes. And I want to say also unequivocally that we need to recognize that this is a turning point in terms of institutional accountability in three ways. One is no institution, no matter how prestigious, is above the law. The second is no teacher, no matter how charismatic, is above accountability. And the third is no student must ever be made to feel that it is their fault that the adults in the room have decided not to protect them.
Absolutely.
It stops now.
It stops now.
Stops now.
Wangui Kaniaru, advocate and Alliance Girls High School alumna, Christine Mungai, journalist, as well as an Alliance Girl High School alumna who started to give these experiences through these stories. And like you said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more going on, and it's not just at Alliance, it's at other schools. That this be the breaking point where we start to talk about these things in the open and protect our children amongst the most vulnerable in societies. And that's why we have those conversations that we do in this room, to be able to do that. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for your courage, and thank you for your zeal. We ask that it doesn't stop.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.